Rodgers gets the snap. Blitz is on. Rodgers scrambles left, winds up Rainbow.
Cobb.
He's got Cobb at the 10 to the 5
Yes!
to the end zone. Touchdown and a dagger. Oh my goodness! An NFC North Division Championship dagger.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to Real Packers Talk, the podcast dedicated to everything green and gold. I am your host, Ethan Peltier. You can find me on both Twitter and Instagram at Real Packers Talk. I'd appreciate it if you give me a follow. And I'm here today with my Week 8 game reaction and analysis. The Packers went to Buffalo and lost to the Bills on Sunday Night Football 17-27 in a game that really never was that close at any given point. Although I do have a lot of things that I want to say about this game because despite the outcome, I thought the Packers showed a couple things. And if you go back to my last episode, the Week 8 predictions episode, I was basically kind of saying that I hope that the Packers, once they do get smacked in the mouth, because they're going against a really good football team. When that happens, how are they going to respond? Will they respond to adversity? And maybe a little bit? I don't know. I'm going to jump right into it. I've got my game notes right here. So without further ado, let's get into it. So, as I just mentioned, this game never really was close at any given point. I mean, the score was 24-7 at halftime. The Bills were leading. So I don't want to sound too optimistic because the Packers still got their butts handed to them in the first half at least. The hopeful, or I guess the good to take away from this is that they played a much better second half. And that's kind of been the MO for this team all year long, is they play one bad half and one good half. And we never really know if that's going to be the first or second. But I thought they did a couple things. They made a few adjustments. And look, there's a couple different ways to look at this, because I know a lot of pessimistic Packers fans are going to say, well, the only reason the Packers scored as many points as they did is because the Bills were content letting them, because they had already built such a big lead that they could afford to let the Packers, chew up that clock just because they knew they weren't going to score enough touchdowns in time. But if you ask me, I thought that they were able to execute certain things. Again, not everything, but they were able to, execute certain things well. And I wanted to touch on those things. There's going to be a little bit of good and a little bit of bad in this episode. Starting with the bad, though, this is the fourth straight loss that we've taken. And the Packers are sitting at 3-5, which is crazy because if you go back a month ago, if you go back to the London game, if the Packers make it out of that, if they don't collapse in the fourth quarter, they're sitting at 4-1. 4 weeks later, they're now sitting at 3-5. That is a massive turnaround, and we've been hearing a lot of this. The Packers are in a must-win narrative, right? I feel like we've heard that the Packers are in a must-win game this week, and that's been the last 4 weeks, and they've lost all of them. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that that is a good thing, but I also don't want to act like the season's over. So while I never want to be unrealistic, I do think that this team could very well still make the playoffs, but they're going to have a lot of things go their way, and they're going to need to make a lot of adjustments now. That being said, I was not surprised that they lost to the Bills this week. This was a game that I expected them to lose, and I'm more happy with their performance considering that I thought they were going to lose. It's like I lowered my expectations. I wasn't let down as much. On top of that, there's no shame in losing on the road to arguably the best team in football right now. When I was doing my research going into this game, the website that I pulled up, and I believe I was even using ESPN.com, the Bills had the number 1 ranked offense and the number 1 ranked defense coming into this game. That is absurd. Now, it really does depend, and I do think that the number 1 ranked offense, what does that even mean? It really does depend on how you look at it. But the point stands that the Bills are a good team, and they played like it. They were also coming off of a bye week. They were well-rested, ready to go, so I'm not surprised by this outcome one bit. I'm not going to go ahead and hop into some statistics for the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Rodgers went 19 for 30, throwing for 203 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, which was a bit of an unfortunate one. But, interceptions happen. Bad, unfortunate bounces happen. Aaron Jones, 20 for 143 yards with an average of 7.2 yards a carry. Please continue feeding this man the ball. It is a necessity. If this offense is going to move the ball, it is a necessity that you do it through Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. Speaking of A.J. Dillon, he went 10 for 54 with another average of 5.4. So those are good numbers. Romeo Doubs had a couple of receptions for 62 yards and an amazing touchdown grab, and I'll get to that in a bit. And then Samori Toure had his first NFL touchdown on a really good adjustment route where Rodgers was basically just extending the play, and Toure recognized that he could break off, and he was wide open for a touchdown. That was awesome to see. For the defensive side of the ball, both Jaire Alexander and Rasul Douglas had picks against Josh Allen, which is awesome. You love to see that. But unfortunately, it was not enough. Jumping over to the Buffalo side, Josh Allen went 13 for 25, throwing for 218 yards, 2 touchdowns, and the aforementioned 2 interceptions. He had a couple rushes for, he was picking up first downs left and right. The dude is such a dual threat when it comes to, his ability to throw and run with the ball. And he beat us. He is arguably one of the best quarterbacks in the league right now, and he beat us with both his arm and his legs, and we paid for it. Devin Singletary went 14 for 67, so he didn't have a crazy productive night, but they continued to move the chains when they needed to. And then Stephon Diggs had 6 receptions for 108 yards and a touchdown, so the Packers secondary couldn't cover him all game long, apparently. It's just, there were good things that came out of this game, and there were bad things that came out of this game. And I know that I mentioned before that Buffalo's a really good team, but you got to find answers, man. At some point, you have to find answers because every time the secondary was, had good coverage, Allen would just escape the pocket and get a first down. There was no containment. It didn't really seem like guys were all too keen on tackling him. And look, I get it. He's, 6'4", 6'3", 200-something pounds. The dude is a monster. I wouldn't want to tackle him either, but you're a professional NFL player, man. Figure it out. And actually, I do have a particular player that I wanted to touch on more later for the Packers that I just thought had a very poor performance, but I'll get to that in the who's hot and who's not section. I do have some other game notes that I wanted to touch on. As the game went on, it became obvious to me that the O-line struggled a lot when it came to pass protection. There would be plays where Aaron Rodgers had all day to throw, and then there would be plays where he got pressured almost immediately. This offensive line is young. It's beat up. There's a number of things that you can say to maybe explain why it's struggling so much, but the fact of the matter is this offensive line has to get going because if you can't win in the trenches, quite frankly, you're not going to win very many football games. Christian Watson went down on practically 5 plays into the game. The very first drive, he went down with a concussion, so hopefully he's all right. One thing I do want to address right now, I've been seeing a lot of Packers fans on social media calling out against Christian Watson, calling him soft, things like that. Look, man, I just think that he's had a really, really unfortunate rookie season so far. He is, yes, a little injury prone, but please do not send hate to a player, especially when he's dealing with a serious injury like a concussion. They're no joke, man. I just wanted to touch on that briefly. But Christian Watson going out really hurt us. It's obvious to me that they do have a plan for him and they want to utilize him. There are certain packages, whether they be those jet sweep motions or whatever, that are specifically designed for him. So that's essentially an entire chunk of your playbook that you're throwing out the window on the very first drive because of that injury. Speaking of other injuries, Devondre Campbell went down with an apparent knee injury. He was seen walking off the field with an ice pack that was strapped around his knee. So that will be something to keep an eye on. Look for Isaiah McDuffie to get the start next week if he's not ready to go. And then another thing that I wanted to mention is Quay Walker got ejected in this game for a pretty weak, but albeit just careless penalty. It was a personal foul on the sideline where one of the Bills, I believe one of their practice squad players that wasn't suited up, he was basically trying to stop the momentum of Quay Walker running, trying to make the tackle on the sideline. And I guess Quay didn't like that, so he got up and pushed him. The ref threw a flag, and then after a brief discussion, they kicked him out of the game. I personally think it's a weak call, but I also understand why it was the way. I understand the decision. It's just a boneheaded rookie mistake. And I know that Matt LaFleur is going to address that. He already probably has. That's just mistakes that we cannot be making. Mental errors. You have to keep your emotions in check. I know it's a tough, gritty game, but if you can't keep your emotions in check, you will get bit, or you will suffer and get penalized for dumb decisions like that. But after all of that negative, after all of that bad, I do find a little bit of hope after watching this game. I think the Packers might have found a formula that works for them on offense via running the ball, which is something that I and a lot of other Packers fans have been begging for what feels like an eternity now. But, when they ran the ball, they were running it pretty effectively, and I think that needs to be the way that we move forward with this offense. Like, how many times have I said that I believe Aaron Jones should get, at least 20 touches a game? He should be our focal point on offense. Additionally, the Packers did dominate time of possession. They had the ball for over 33 minutes, while the Bills only had it for about 26. So being able to keep the other team's offense off the field is another way that I think this team is going to have to operate moving forward for them to win. And that's a good thing to see, that they were able to at least accomplish minor victories. While they're still not playing complimentary football, I think they're taking baby steps in the right direction. And a term that you're probably going to hear a lot this week is moral victory. I can't remember who exactly came with the quote, but someone said we're not going to take moral victories here. And while I completely understand that, I think you have to take any victory you can get at this point, especially when you're 2 games below 500 on the year. Sitting at 3-5, there is a lot that could happen. There's still a lot of football to be played left. And the first big step that the Packers need in order to get, back on track is obviously a win. That starts with a victory against the Lions next week. That, again, I know I touched early on how I don't like calling these games must-win games, but next week, in my opinion, is a must-win game for the sole fact that they need to wake up. And if they drop 5 straight, I don't know if I have any faith in this team anymore. But hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully they are able to make a statement win next week and get back on track. Moving on to the Who's Hot, Who's Not segment of this episode. Starting with Who's Hot, I've got Rasul Douglas and Romeo Doubs. For Rasul Douglas, he had the interception, and honestly, these last couple weeks, he's just been playing all over the field. Could have a couple more interceptions, but he's been playing well. Romeo Doubs obviously had a couple of receptions today, a couple of big receptions, along with that incredible touchdown catch. I mean, he literally had to turn around 3 times and then make a diving catch with the guy draped all over him in the corner of the end zone. It was just phenomenal play from him. I hope he gets more opportunities like that because he has shown that he can make those plays. For the Who's Not candidate, I've got Darnell Savage, who, man, this has been a rough year. He has just not played well. Missed tackles. He's out of position, getting beat deep on those crossing routes. I mean, he just did not have a good game at all. You can go back and watch several missed tackles, and they're pretty bad. These are tackles that he has to be making. And as it stands right now, we've already picked up his 5th-year option, so the Packers might have screwed themselves over if he can't get back on track. So I'm hoping that he can turn this thing around, but as of lately, Darnell Savage has just been struggling big time. But that's about everything that I had to speak about as far as this last game against Buffalo went. In other news from Packerland this week, there were no free agency moves made at the deadline. which, am I surprised? Nope. Am I disappointed? Maybe a little. I don't know. I thought we might make a move this year, considering that it seems pretty obvious that we need a little bit of help at wide receiver. And apparently there was a report that came out that the Packers tried to match the offer that the Bears made to trade for Chase Claypool from the Steelers. And the Steelers apparently went with the Bears because they assumed that the Bears would have a higher draft pick, which, hey, I don't blame them. It's tough, and look, I know Packers fans are going to complain. Every year it's the same thing. I mean, what did you expect? Did you expect us to go out and try and make a big splash trade or, signing? It's just not the way that the Packers operate. Just moving forward, though, I do think that this team has a lot of work to do. I think there are some positives to take away from this game. There are definitely some negatives to take away from this game. But I'm praying and hoping that they're taking those little baby steps in the right direction. And look, man, they really just have to take it one game at a time moving forward. This NFC conference the NFC is just wide open. Yes, the Packers are probably not going to win the NFC North this year. They're 4 games behind Minnesota as of right now, who they've been winning their games, and the Packers haven't. And that's just a hole I don't see them climbing out of. But, like I said earlier, this is still a team that could make the playoffs. They're just going to have a couple things go their way. With that, though, I just want to say thank you for listening to today's episode. It really does mean a ton to me. I want to remind you that you can find this podcast anywhere on Spotify, Anchor, and YouTube. Please feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe, all those great things. And then if you don't mind following me on Twitter and Instagram at RealPackersTalk, feel free to shoot me a DM, chat Packers sometimes. I'd love to interact with you guys. Thanks again, and I'm going to leave y'all with a Go Pack Go. Peace.